While I buried my grandson alone, my son and his wife were drinking at a bar in the next town over. I stood at the graveside, Charlotte's small hand clutched in mine, watching the polished mahogany casket being lowered into the unforgiving earth. The pastor's words blurred into the background as I focused on the 2 empty chairs in the front row, seats reserved for parents who couldn't be bothered to say goodbye to their own child, Carl. My brilliant, kind-hearted 16-year-old grandson with his father's eyes and none of his flaws. Gone in an instant during a lake outing with friends that turned tragic when he dove in to help a struggling swimmer and never resurfaced himself. Always the hero, even in his final moments. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. Grandma, when are Mom and Dad coming? Charlotte whispered, her 7-year-old voice trembling with confusion rather than grief. She was still too young to fully comprehend the permanence of death, but old enough to notice her parents' absence. I'm not sure, sweetheart, I lied, knowing exactly where they were. Gregory had texted earlier, can't handle this today. Taking Jessie for drinks. She's a mess, we'll stop by tomorrow. A mess. As if their suffering somehow outranked mine, or Charlotte's, or the 50 people who had actually shown up. Carl's teachers, classmates, church youth group, and neighbors who had watched him grow up under my care for the past 6 years. 6 years since Gregory and Jessie had appeared at my door with 2 shell-shocked children and suitcases, explaining they needed a short break from parenting to find themselves. That break had extended indefinitely, with them dropping by for the occasional holiday or birthday, playing at Parenthood for a few hours before disappearing again. Gerald, my late husband, had seen it coming years before. Gregory was never going to be the father those kids deserve, he'd told me, while setting up the trust funds. We need to make sure they're taken care of properly. At the time, I thought he was being harsh on our only son. Now, standing beside Carl's grave, I recognized it as simple truth. The ceremony concluded, and people filed past with hugs and condolences. Carl's best friend Marcus lingered, his eyes red-rimmed. He saved my little brother, he said hoarsely. I want you to know that. When Jason started struggling in the deep water, Carl didn't hesitate, not for a second. I hugged him tightly. That sounds exactly like Carl. As the last mourners departed, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I waited until Charlotte was distracted by the flower arrangements before checking it. A text from Jessie. Stop being dramatic. This is urgent. We need to discuss Carl's trust fund. My fingers tightened around the phone as white-hot anger surged through me. My grandson wasn't even in the ground, and they were already circling like vultures over the $950,000 that Gerald had left him. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Also, we're coming for Charlotte tomorrow. It's time she came home. You're not in a state to care for her right now. Home. As if they had ever provided one. As if the house where Charlotte had her own carefully decorated bedroom, where she'd lived since she was barely a year old, where her brother had taught her to read and ride a bike, wasn't her real home. Charlotte, honey, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. Let's go back to the house now. People will be bringing food. As we walked to my car, I glanced back at Carl's grave one last time. The cemetery was peaceful, oak trees casting dappled shadows across the manicured grass. Carl had loved those trees, climbing them fearlessly as a child before his interests turned to science and computers. Grandma, Charlotte said suddenly, her small face serious beneath her black hat. Mom texted me that I'm going to live with them again, but I don't want to. Can I stay with you? My heart clenched. I hadn't realized they'd already contacted her directly. When did she text you, sweetheart? During the funeral. Charlotte pulled out the small phone we'd given her for emergencies. She said they're my real parents, and it's time I remembered that. I took a deep breath, calculating my next move carefully. Gregory and Jessie had signed over temporary guardianship years ago, but they remained Charlotte's legal parents. And now, with Carl gone and his trust fund hanging in the balance, they were suddenly interested in reclaiming their daughter. We'll figure it all out, I promised, helping her into the car. But for now, we're going home together. As I drove away from the cemetery, my mind raced through options and scenarios. I needed legal advice immediately. I needed to understand exactly what rights I had to protect Charlotte and to preserve Carl's legacy from those who had no moral claim to it. My phone buzzed again with another message from Jessie. BTW will need statements from the bank on Carl's account. Our lawyer needs to see all the documentation ASAP. They already had a lawyer. Of course they did. In that moment, staring at the text while stopped at a red light, I made a decision. Gerald had always said I was the backbone of our family, the one who found solutions when others saw only problems. It was time to prove him right. Gregory and Jessie had no idea who they were up against. They saw a grieving 67-year-old grandmother, easily manipulated and overwhelmed. What they failed to remember was that before retirement, I'd been a high school principal for 30 years, navigating bureaucracy, difficult parents, and crisis situations with a calm efficiency that had earned me both respect and a few enemies. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Charlotte, who was staring out the window, her small profile so reminiscent of Carl at that age. "Everything okay, Grandma?" she asked, catching my gaze. "It will be," I promised, with more conviction than I felt. "It absolutely will be." What I didn't say was that her parents had just declared war, and I was already assembling my arsenal. The house was filled with the murmur of sympathetic voices when we returned from the cemetery. Neighbors and church members had arrived bearing casseroles and condolences, transforming our grief-stricken home into a muted celebration of Carl's life. Photos of him adorned every surface. Carl at his science fair, Carl with his youth group, Carl holding newborn Charlotte with awe on his young face. I moved mechanically through the rituals of hospitality, accepting hugs and repeating the story of Carl's heroism, while my mind worked furiously on a strategy for the battle ahead. Charlotte stayed close to my side, as if sensing the threat to our small family unit. "Where are Greg and Jessie?" Mrs. Patel from next door finally asked the question hanging in the air. "I haven't seen them all day. They're processing their grief privately," I replied, the diplomatic answer of a woman who'd spent decades managing difficult situations with grace. Mrs. Patel's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see," she said, in a tone that confirmed she saw exactly what kind of people my son and his wife truly were. After the last guest departed, leaving behind a refrigerator packed with enough food to last a week, I tucked Charlotte into bed with extra stories and reassurances. When her breathing finally deepened into sleep, I retreated to Gerald's old office, a room I'd preserved almost exactly as he left it 3 years ago. The familiar space, with its leather chair and bookshelves lined with financial volumes, brought a measure of comfort. Gerald had been the planner in our relationship, always 3 steps ahead of any potential problem. I needed his foresight now more than ever. I unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, where he kept important documents. The trust fund paperwork was organized in meticulous folders, each labeled in Gerald's precise handwriting: Carl Wilson Trust and Charlotte Wilson Trust. A third folder caught my eye: Contingency Measures. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to me in Gerald's handwriting, dated just 2 months before his heart attack. "My dear Carol, if you're reading this, I suspect Gregory and Jessie have made a move for the children's money. I've seen the calculation in their eyes whenever finances are mentioned, and I fear that my death might embolden them. I've structured both trusts with multiple safeguards. As primary trustee, you have considerable discretionary power. In the event of Carl or Charlotte's death before age 25, the funds do not automatically revert to Gregory and Jessie. Instead, they remain in trust, with you maintaining trustee authority to distribute according to what you believe the child would have wanted. I've also taken the liberty of documenting Gregory and Jessie's parental negligence over the years with the help of our attorney, James Harrington. You'll find his contact information enclosed. He has all the necessary evidence should custody of either child be contested. Remember, my love, you are stronger than you know, and you were always the better judge of character between us. All my love, Gerald." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely for the first time since Carl's accident. Even from beyond the grave, Gerald was protecting us. I reached for the phone and dialed James Harrington's number, glancing at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Too late for a professional call, but this couldn't wait. To my surprise, he answered on the third ring. "James Harrington. Mr. Harrington, this is Carol Wilson, Gerald's wife." A pause, then recognition. "Mrs. Wilson, I've been expecting your call, though not under these circumstances. I was deeply sorry to hear about Carl." "You know about Carl?" I asked, confused. "It was in the local paper. And to be frank, I've been monitoring the situation since Gerald asked me to years ago." I'm aware that Gregory and Jesse have recently consulted with Patricia Simmons, a family law attorney with a reputation for aggressive tactics. My stomach tightened. They've already found a lawyer. They want Carl's trust fund and they're coming for Charlotte. Yes, I anticipated as much. Patricia filed preliminary paperwork this morning. A petition for Gregory and Jesse to be named beneficiaries of Carl's trust and an emergency motion for the return of Charlotte to their custody. The room seemed to spin. This morning? Before the funeral? I'm afraid so. They're claiming you've alienated Charlotte's affections and that Carl's death has rendered you emotionally unstable. Standard tactics, but potentially effective if we're not prepared. I fought to steady my breathing. What do? First, we counter their emergency motion immediately. I've taken the liberty of preparing the necessary documents. I just need your signature. Second, we need to demonstrate their pattern of parental abandonment. Do you have records of their visits, financial support, or lack thereof, over the past 6 years? I have everything, I confirmed, thinking of the meticulous calendar I'd maintained, documenting every missed birthday, every canceled visit, every time Charlotte had cried herself to sleep, asking for parents who never came. Gerald said you have evidence as well. Indeed, Gerald hired a private investigator to document their lifestyle. We have considerable photographic evidence of their priorities, none of which included their children. For the first time since reading Jesse's text, I felt a flicker of hope. When can we meet? I'll come to you first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, if Gregory and Jesse attempt to remove Charlotte from your home, call the police immediately. The temporary guardianship agreement gives you legal standing until a court rules otherwise. After ending the call, I sat in Gerald's chair, drawing strength from the familiar scent of his leather-bound books and the faint traces of his aftershave that somehow lingered years later. I opened my laptop and began compiling my own evidence, photographs of school events where only I had attended, medical records showing me as the consistent caregiver, and screenshots of the sparse, infrequent text messages from Gregory and Jesse over the years. A soft knock interrupted my work. Charlotte stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Bad dream?" I asked, opening my arms. She nodded, climbing into my lap. "I dreamed Mom and Dad took me away, and I couldn't see Carl anymore." I stroked her dark hair, so similar to her brother's. "Carl will always be with us in our hearts, sweetheart, and you and I are staying together. I promise." As Charlotte drifted back to sleep in my arms, I made another promise, silent but no less binding. I would honor Carl's memory and protect his sister, no matter what it took. Gregory and Jesse had declared war at the worst possible moment, when they thought grief had weakened me. They were about to discover how very wrong they were. James Harrington arrived at 8 the next morning, carrying a leather briefcase and exuding the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to winning. In his mid-60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he reminded me of Gerald in his methodical approach to problems. "They'll be here by 10, he warned, setting out documents on my dining room table. "Gregory called my office demanding to know why I'm representing you instead of them. He seems to believe family loyalty should override professional ethics." I snorted, pouring us both coffee. Gregory has always had a selective understanding of loyalty. Charlotte was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from grief and worry. I'd called her school to arrange a week's absence, speaking with her counselor about providing support when she returned. Through it all, a sense of unreality persisted. How could I be discussing my grandson's funeral and custody battles in the same week? "We need to discuss strategy," James said, spreading out papers in organized piles. "Patricia Simmons is building her case on 2 fronts, financial control and custody. For the trust, she's arguing that as Carl's parents, Gregory and Jesse are the natural inheritors of his assets. For Charlotte, she's claiming that your age and emotional state after Carl's death make you unfit as a guardian." "I'm only 67, for heaven's sake. I was still running a high school 2 years ago." James nodded. "Your age isn't the issue, and they know it. It's a smokescreen. What they really want is control of both trusts, Carl's $950,000 and access to Charlotte's $750,000 through regaining custody." I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. "What's our counter? For the trust fund, we have Gerald's explicit instructions. He anticipated this scenario and included specific language giving you discretionary control in the event of Carl's death before age 25. James tapped a document with his index finger. You have the authority to determine how those funds are used in accordance with what you believe Carl would have wanted. A weight lifted slightly from my shoulders. And for Charlotte? That's where we need to be especially strategic. We have substantial evidence of abandonment. 6 years of minimal contact, no financial support, missed visitations. But family courts are notoriously inclined to favor biological parents, even those with spotty records. I glanced at the ceiling, thinking of Charlotte sleeping above us. She doesn't want to go with them. She barely knows them. Her preference will be considered, given her age, but it won't be determinative. James removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. Our strongest argument is stability and continuity of care. Charlotte has lived with you during her formative years, attends school here, has friends and support systems in place. Removing her now, especially after her brother's death, would cause additional trauma. The doorbell rang, jolting us both. "They're early," I murmured, checking my watch. Not even 9. When I opened the door, I was momentarily speechless. Gregory and Jessie stood on my porch, looking uncharacteristically polished. Gregory in a button-down shirt instead of his usual band t-shirts. Jessie with her normally wild hair neatly styled, wearing a conservative dress I'd never seen before. "Mom," Gregory said, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I stepped back. "You missed your son's funeral yesterday." His manufactured smile faltered. "We were grieving in our own way. It was too painful to attend." "Too painful for you, but not for your 7-year-old daughter?" I kept my voice low, conscious of Charlotte upstairs. "Or for me, burying my grandson alone?" "We're here now," Jessie interjected, her voice sugary sweet. "For Charlotte. She needs her parents at a time like this." "She needed her parents for the past 6 years," I replied evenly. "Funny how you've suddenly remembered that now." Gregory's expression hardened. "Are you going to let us in? We have a right to see our daughter." "You have scheduled visitation rights, as outlined in the temporary guardianship agreement you both signed. Today is not one of those days." "That agreement is being terminated," Jessie snapped, her cultivated facade cracking. "We're taking Charlotte home with us today. We've already enrolled her in a school near our apartment." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "The apartment you've been evicted from twice in the past year?" A flicker of surprise crossed Gregory's face. "How did you—" "Please come in," James called from behind me, his tone professionally cordial. "I believe we have matters to discuss before anyone makes decisions about Charlotte's living arrangements." Gregory's eyes narrowed at the sight of Gerald's lawyer. "What's he doing here?" "Representing my interests," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. They moved cautiously into the living room, taking in the photos of Carl and Charlotte that covered the walls and shelves, visual documentation of a childhood they'd largely missed. "Where's Charlotte?" Jessie demanded, glancing around as if expecting to find her hidden somewhere. "Still sleeping. She had nightmares about her brother's death, the brother whose funeral you skipped to go drinking." Gregory flushed. "You have no right to judge how we process grief." "Actually," James interjected, "Mrs. Wilson has every right to be concerned about your priorities, given the motion you've filed for custody." "Our lawyer advised us to act quickly," Jessie said defensively, "before you could hide assets or influence Charlotte against us. The accusation was so ludicrous I couldn't formulate an immediate response." "Hide assets?" I'd spent 6 years meticulously accounting for every penny of the children's trusts, with annual reports to the bank's trust department. "I think," James said calmly, "we should discuss realistic expectations here. Gregory, Jessie, Mrs. Wilson has been the children's primary caregiver for 6 years, with minimal intervention or support from either of you. The court will take that into consideration." "We're her parents," Gregory insisted. "Blood matters." "So does showing up," I countered, unable to contain myself. "So does being there for birthdays and school performances and nightmares and flu seasons. So does actually parenting, not just contributing DNA." Jessie's face contorted with anger. "You've always thought you were better than us, the perfect mother, the respected principal. You turned Carl against us, and now you're doing the same with Charlotte. Carl formed his own opinions based on your actions, or lack thereof," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "And Charlotte barely knows you because that's what you chose." "Enough," James intervened. "This isn't productive. Gregory, Jessie, I understand you've retained Patricia Simmons. I suggest we schedule a formal meeting with all parties present to discuss potential resolutions that prioritize Charlotte's well-being." Gregory crossed his arms. We're not leaving without our daughter. I'm afraid you are, James replied, his pleasant tone unchanged. The current guardianship agreement remains in effect until a court orders otherwise. Attempting to remove Charlotte from Mrs. Wilson's home without proper authority would constitute parental kidnapping, a felony in this state. The silence that followed was electric. I could almost see Gregory calculating his options, the same expression he'd worn as a teenager, trying to talk his way out of trouble. Before he could respond, small footsteps sounded on the stairs. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, eyes widening at the sight of her parents. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" Jessie immediately transformed, her voice honey-sweet. "Charlotte, sweetheart, we came to take you home with us. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" Charlotte took a step backward. "But I am home." In that moment, seeing my granddaughter's confusion and fear, I knew this battle was just beginning, and that I would fight with every ounce of strength I possessed to protect her from the storm ahead. Charlotte's simple statement, "But I am home," hung in the air like a thunderclap. I watched Jessie's practiced smile falter, revealing the brittle anger beneath. "Don't be silly, sweetheart," she recovered quickly, approaching Charlotte with outstretched arms. "Your real home is with your mom and dad. We've got your room all ready. Pink walls, just like you wanted when you were little." Charlotte remained in the doorway, not moving into Jessie's embrace. "I don't like pink anymore. My room here is blue and silver. Carl helped me paint the stars on the ceiling." I saw the flash of irritation in Jessie's eyes at this reminder of how little she knew her own daughter. Charlotte had outgrown her pink phase 3 years ago, moving on to a fascination with space and astronomy encouraged by her science-loving brother. "Well, we can repaint it any color you want," Gregory interjected, trying a different approach. "The important thing is we'll be together, a real family again." Charlotte looked at me, uncertainty in her eyes. I wanted desperately to intervene, to shield her from this confrontation. But James had advised letting Charlotte express her own feelings. At 7, the courts would at least consider her preferences, even if they weren't determinative. "What about Grandma?" Charlotte asked. "And school? And Maisie next door? And Carl's fish tank that I promised I'd take care of?" "Grandma can visit," Gregory said dismissively, "and you'll make new friends at your new school. As for the fish," he shrugged, "we can get new ones." I watched my granddaughter's face harden with a determination that reminded me powerfully of Carl. "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to go. Carl wouldn't want me to go either." Jessie's facade cracked completely. "Carl is gone, Charlotte, and it's time you stopped letting your grandmother turn you against us. We're your real family." "I think," James interrupted smoothly, "that this conversation is causing Charlotte unnecessary distress. Gregory, Jessie, perhaps we should continue our discussion without her present." "She's our daughter," Jessie snapped. "We don't need your permission to talk to her." I crossed to Charlotte, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and get dressed? Maybe check on Carl's fish. I'll bring you some breakfast in a little while." Charlotte hesitated, looking between her parents and me. "Are they going to make me leave?" "No decisions are being made today," James answered before I could. "Right now, you continue living with your grandmother, just like always." After Charlotte retreated upstairs, Gregory rounded on me. "You've poisoned her against us, turned our own daughter into a stranger." "Charlotte is not a stranger," I replied evenly. "She's the child you left with me 6 years ago and visited maybe 10 times since. She's the little girl who stopped asking when you were coming for her birthday after you missed 3 in a row. She's a second grader who excels at math, has 2 best friends named Maisie and Zoe, and sleeps with the nightlight on because she's afraid of the dark. If she seems like a stranger to you, Gregory, that's entirely your doing, not mine." Gregory's face flushed dark with anger. "You self-righteous." "That's enough," James cut in, his voice suddenly steely. "This meeting is clearly unproductive. I suggest we continue communication through proper legal channels. Mrs. Wilson has offered reasonable visitation with Charlotte while the court considers your petition. I advise you to accept that offer as evidence of your genuine interest in Charlotte's well-being." "We're not settling for visitation," Jessie retorted. "We want our daughter, and we want Carl's trust fund released immediately. Carl would have wanted us to have it." The naked greed in her statement stunned me into momentary silence. James, however, didn't miss a beat. "That's an interesting perspective considering Carl's journal entries specifically discussing his concerns about your financial motives." James removed a bound notebook from his briefcase, Carl's journal, which I'd provided him earlier that morning. "Would you like me to read some relevant passages for the record?" Gregory paled visibly. "You can't use a dead kid's diary against his parents. That's sick." "On the contrary," James replied calmly. "Carl's expressed wishes regarding his trust fund are highly relevant to how it should be managed now. For instance, his entries from just 3 months ago, where he discusses his plans to use the money for college and to establish a scholarship for underprivileged students interested in environmental science. I hadn't known about that plan. The revelation brought fresh tears to my eyes, thinking of my grandson's generous spirit, his desire to help others, even while planning his own future. "This is ridiculous," Jessie snapped, gathering her purse. "Our lawyer will be in touch. Don't think for a minute this is over." "One moment," James said, removing another document from his briefcase. "Before you go, you should be aware that Mrs. Wilson has filed a counter-petition requesting formal adoption of Charlotte, given the documented abandonment over the past 6 years. "Abandonment?" Gregory exploded. "We left her in the care of a family member. That's not abandonment." "The law disagrees," James replied, unperturbed. "Specifically, the failure to maintain consistent contact, provide financial support, or demonstrate meaningful parental involvement for a period exceeding 18 months constitutes constructive abandonment in this state. You've done all 3 for over 6 years. Jessie grabbed Gregory's arm. "Let's go. Patricia will handle this. She promised we had an airtight case." As they stormed toward the door, Jessie paused, turning back with venom in her eyes. "By the way, Carol, you should know we've already spoken to the bank. Patricia says as Carl's legal heirs, that money is as good as ours. You're just postponing the inevitable." After they left, I collapsed into a chair, the adrenaline of confrontation draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Will they really get Carl's money? James sat beside me, his expression somber. "Not if I can help it. Gerald was very explicit in the trust documentation. But we need to prepare for an aggressive legal battle. Patricia Simmons has a reputation for scorched earth tactics in family court. What about Charlotte? That's more complicated. Despite their negligence, there's a strong presumption in favor of biological parents. Our best strategy is to demonstrate that uprooting Charlotte now would cause significant psychological harm, especially following her brother's death." I nodded, thinking of the little girl upstairs who had already lost so much. "What's our next move?" "We document everything, every interaction, every statement about their intentions for the money. We gather character witnesses, Charlotte's teachers, your neighbors, anyone who can testify to the stability of her life with you versus the chaos with them." James packed his documents methodically. "Most importantly, we prepare Charlotte for the possibility of court-ordered evaluations. She'll need to speak with psychologists, possibly a guardian ad litem appointed to represent her interests." After James left, I carried breakfast upstairs to find Charlotte sitting on her bed, clutching the stuffed otter Carl had given her for her 5th birthday. "Are they gone?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes, sweetheart. They're gone for now. They want Carl's money," she said, with the devastating directness of childhood. "That's why they suddenly want me too, isn't it?" I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Your parents are going through a difficult time right now, making choices I don't agree with. But I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and honor Carl's memory properly." Charlotte leaned against me, her small body somehow containing both fragility and remarkable strength. "Carl always said money makes people crazy. I guess he was right." "Carl was right about a lot of things," I agreed, holding her close and silently renewing my vow to protect her, no matter what storms lay ahead. The media caught wind of the story 3 days later. I opened my front door to find the local newspaper's weekend edition featuring a side column headline, "Family Battles Over Drowned Teen's $1 Million Trust Fund." The reporter had somehow obtained details about the legal filings, presenting the case as a sensationalized family drama rather than the heartbreaking reality we were living. Charlotte, thankfully, was at a play date with Maisie next door, a brief reprieve from the grief and tension permeating our home. I scanned the article with mounting horror, noting quotes from sources close to the family who claimed I was emotionally manipulating my granddaughter while hoarding assets rightfully belonging to the parents. Gregory and Jessie, or more likely their attorney, had taken their battle to the court of public opinion. I was still seething when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in years, Michael Wilson, Gregory's younger brother, who had moved to California after a falling out with the family nearly a decade ago. Mike? I answered cautiously. Carol, thank God. His voice sounded tight with emotion. I just saw the news online. Is it true about Carl? The genuine grief in his voice brought fresh tears to my eyes. Yes, a drowning accident at Lake Millerton. He was trying to save another boy. That sounds like Carl. Always the hero. Mike paused. And now Greg and Jesse are suing you for his trust fund and custody of Charlotte? After abandoning both kids for years? You've been keeping tabs on the family? I asked, surprised. From a distance. I call one of your neighbors every few months to check in. Mrs. Patel. She keeps me updated. That explained the occasional knowing look in my neighbor's eyes when I mentioned Mike's absence from family events. I'm coming home, he continued. I'll be on the next flight. This is beyond the pale, even for Greg. I hadn't expected this. Mike had left Pennsylvania after a bitter argument with Gerald and Gregory over the family construction business. Gerald had chosen Gregory to take over, despite Mike's superior work ethic and business acumen, simply because Gregory was the eldest son. The business had failed within 3 years under Gregory's mismanagement, a vindication Mike never got to witness since he'd already severed contact by then. That's not necessary, I started, but he cut me off. It absolutely is. Carl and Charlotte are my niece and nephew, even if I've been a lousy long-distance uncle. And you're more of a parent to me than my biological father ever was. His voice hardened. I'm not going to sit back while Greg and that parasite he married try to cash in on Carl's death. Within 24 hours, Mike was sitting in my living room, jet-lagged but determined. At 39, he'd matured into a successful architect with his own firm in San Francisco. A far cry from the angry young man who'd left Pennsylvania. His presence brought unexpected comfort. Another person who genuinely grieved Carl rather than calculating the value of his trust fund. I've read all the legal documents, he said, reviewing the papers James had left with me. Gerald was smart to set things up this way, giving you discretionary control. But Greg's going to fight dirty. He always does. He already is. I sighed. They've painted me as a manipulative old woman trying to steal their children's inheritance. Mike's jaw tightened. Let me talk to him. Maybe I can make him see reason. I doubt it. This isn't just Gregory. It's Jesse driving this. And their lawyer has convinced them they have a winnable case. Then let me help another way. Mike leaned forward intently. I want to testify about Greg's character, his history of financial irresponsibility, how he ran Dad's business into the ground, how he always took the easy path, regardless of who got hurt. That's family dirty laundry, I cautioned. Are you sure you want to go public with all that? If it protects Charlotte and honors Carl's legacy? Absolutely. Mike's expression was resolute. Greg forfeited any claim to family loyalty when he abandoned his children, then came crawling back for their money. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. I opened it to find Marcus, Carl's best friend, standing awkwardly on the porch with his parents. Mrs. Wilson, I'm sorry to bother you, he began, but I saw the newspaper article, the stuff they're saying about you. It's all lies. His mother, Elena Rodriguez, stepped forward. We want to help, Carol. Carl was like a second son in our home. Marcus has 4 years of text messages from Carl discussing his parents' absence and how grateful he was for your care. And videos, Marcus added, from when he was helping my brother after the accident. He recorded himself and Jason on his phone right before. His voice cracked. Before he went back in to try again. I stared at them, uncomprehending. There's video of the accident? Marcus nodded solemnly. The police have the original, but I have the backup from his cloud account. He was always paranoid about losing data, so he gave me his password. He pulled out his phone. You should see it, especially what he says about you. With trembling hands, I accepted the phone. The video showed Carl and a younger boy, both soaking wet, sitting on the shore of Lake Millerton. Carl's normally neat hair was plastered to his forehead, his expression simultaneously relieved and concerned. So, Jason Rodriguez, survivor extraordinaire. Carl's voice came through the speaker, breathless but playful. Tell the camera how awesome I am for pulling you out. The younger boy, perhaps 12, rolled his eyes despite his obvious exhaustion. You're the best, Carl. A regular superhero. Happy now? Ecstatic. Carl laughed. Then his expression grew more serious. Seriously, though. You good? We should probably get you checked out. Grandma Carol always says near drowning can have delayed effects. I'm fine, Jason insisted. Just don't tell my mom how far out I was. She'll never let me swim again. Your secret's safe with me. Carl turned the camera to face himself directly. And speaking of Grandma Carol, if she ever sees this, I want the record to show that I did not go past the safety buoys. I was being a responsible adult, saving lives within the designated swimming area. His smile softened. Love you, Grandma. Don't worry, we're heading back now. Just needed a minute to catch our breath. The video ended there. According to the police report, moments later, another child had started struggling in deeper water. Carl had handed his phone to Jason, told him to wait on shore, and gone back in, this time swimming beyond his capabilities in rougher water. Tears streamed down my face as I handed the phone back to Marcus. I didn't know this existed. There's more, Elena said gently. Carl talked to Marcus extensively about his plans for his trust fund. He was researching scholarships and environmental conservation projects, all documented in their messages. Mike, who had joined us at the door, placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. This directly contradicts Greg and Jesse's claim that Carl would have wanted them to have his money. A new sense of purpose straightened my spine. Would you be willing to share these messages with our lawyer and possibly testify if this goes to court? Marcus nodded without hesitation. Carl was my best friend. No way I'm letting his parents cash in on his death when they couldn't be bothered with him while he was alive. As I invited the Rodriguez family inside, I felt the first genuine hope since this battle began. Gregory and Jesse had the advantage of being Charlotte's biological parents, but I had something potentially more powerful. The truth about who had truly loved and parented these children, documented in Carl's own words. By evening's end, my dining room table was covered with evidence, printouts of text conversations, school records showing who had attended parent-teacher conferences, medical forms signed exclusively by me, and photographs documenting 6 years of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary moments, all without Gregory and Jesse. We're building a strong case, Mike observed, organizing the papers into folders. Not just for Charlotte's custody, but for honoring Carl's wishes for his trust fund. I gazed at the wall of family photos, my eyes lingering on Carl's school portrait from just 3 months ago, his gentle smile so reminiscent of Gerald's. It's not about winning a legal battle, I said quietly. It's about protecting what Carl valued and ensuring Charlotte doesn't lose her home along with her brother. Mike nodded, understanding in his eyes. One battle at a time, Carol, and this time, you're not fighting alone. The preliminary hearing took place 2 weeks after Carl's funeral. I sat at the defendant's table beside James, with Mike directly behind us in the first row of the gallery. Across the aisle, Gregory and Jesse presented the picture of grieving parents in subdued business attire, a striking contrast to their typical casual appearance. Their attorney, Patricia Simmons, was everything James had warned me about, sharp-featured and sharper-tongued, with a predatory confidence as she arranged her documents. She had already filed multiple motions attempting to exclude Carl's text messages and journal entries, arguing they represented hearsay from a minor and were potentially manipulated after his death. Thankfully, the judge had denied these motions, recognizing their relevance to Carl's wishes regarding his trust fund. Charlotte was not present, spared this proceeding by the judge's decision to interview her privately in chambers later. She'd spent the morning with the Rodriguez family, who had become unexpected pillars of support during this ordeal. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Harriet Watkins entered, a veteran family court judge known for her no-nonsense approach. After the preliminaries, Patricia Simmons launched immediately into her narrative. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about parents seeking to reclaim their parental rights and secure the inheritance legally intended for them following the tragic death of their son. Mrs. Wilson has used her position as temporary guardian to alienate these children from their biological parents and now seeks to deny them both custody of their daughter and access to funds rightfully theirs as Carl Wilson's legal heirs. Judge Watkins's expression remained neutral, but I noticed her eyes sharpen at Simmons's characterization. Mr. Harrington, your response? James rose calmly. Your Honor, this case is about honoring the explicit legal arrangements made by Gerald Wilson before his death, which granted Carol Wilson trustee authority over both children's trust funds with specific provisions regarding distribution in the event of either child's death before age 25. It is also about maintaining stability for Charlotte Wilson, who has resided with her grandmother for 6 years with only minimal contact from her parents. Finally, it is about respecting Carl Wilson's clearly documented wishes regarding his trust fund, which demonstrably did not include transferring it to parents who were largely absent from his life. Judge Watkins nodded. Let's address the trust fund issue first, as it appears to be driving much of this dispute. Ms. Simmons, on what grounds do your clients claim entitlement to Carl Wilson's trust fund, despite the explicit language giving Mrs. Wilson discretionary authority? Simmons stepped forward. Your Honor, as Carl's legal parents, Gregory and Jessica Wilson are his natural heirs under state law. The discretionary authority granted to Mrs. Wilson was intended for managing the fund until Carl reached maturity, not for circumventing inheritance laws after his death. That's a creative interpretation, Judge Watkins remarked dryly. Mr. Harrington, the trust document language? James presented the relevant papers. Section 14, paragraph C, explicitly states, in the event of the beneficiary's death prior to age 25, the trustee shall retain discretionary authority to distribute remaining funds in a manner consistent with the beneficiary's expressed wishes or best interests. Gerald Wilson specifically included this language to prevent exactly this scenario. The judge reviewed the document carefully. Ms. Simmons, this language seems clear. What evidence do you have that Carl Wilson wished his trust fund to go to his parents rather than be used according to Mrs. Wilson's discretion? Carl was a minor, Your Honor. His legal interests were naturally aligned with his parents. That's not evidence, Judge Watkins pointed out. That's supposition. Simmons shifted tactics. Your Honor, Carl's relationship with his parents was complicated by Mrs. Wilson's interference. Any expressions contrary to his natural filial loyalty were likely influenced by her systematic alienation efforts. I felt my blood pressure rising at this blatant mischaracterization, but James placed a calming hand on my arm. Your Honor, he interjected, we have substantial evidence of Carl's actual wishes, expressed consistently over several years without any prompting from Mrs. Wilson. The judge gestured for him to proceed. James introduced Marcus Rodriguez, who testified about the text messages and conversations documenting Carl's plans for his trust fund, college, environmental scholarships, and supporting his sister's future education. Next came Carl's academic advisor, Dr. E. Lillian Chen, who confirmed Carl had consulted her about university programs in environmental science, discussing how his trust fund would cover his education while allowing him to establish a scholarship program. Throughout these testimonies, I watched Gregory and Jesse's expressions shift from confidence to discomfort as Carl's independent voice emerged through the witnesses, a voice clearly articulating plans that never included financially supporting the parents who had effectively abandoned him. When Patricia Simmons cross-examined Marcus, attempting to suggest that I had coached him on his testimony, he responded with teenage bluntness. Mrs. Wilson didn't need to tell me anything. I have 4 years of texts from Carl talking about how his parents ditched him and Charlotte. Want me to read some highlights? After the morning's witnesses, Judge Watkins called a lunch recess. In the hallway, I found myself face-to-face with Gregory, who had separated from Jesse and their attorney. Mom, he began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. This is getting out of hand. Can't we talk about this privately? Come to some arrangement? What kind of arrangement? I asked cautiously. Split the money. You keep Charlotte for now. We'll take visitation and half of Carl's trust. Everyone wins. The casual way he suggested dividing his dead son's legacy like spoils of war made my stomach turn. Carl's trust isn't a bargaining chip, Gregory. It represents his future. The one you and Jesse were never interested in supporting while he was alive. His expression hardened. He was our son. That money belongs to us now. No, I corrected quietly. That money belonged to Carl, and now it belongs to his legacy, whatever that should be, which is exactly what your father intended when he structured the trust this way, knowing you couldn't be trusted with it. Gregory's face flushed with anger. Dad always thought the worst of me. Looks like you're carrying on that tradition. Your father, I replied evenly, gave you multiple chances to prove him wrong. The family business, the trust funds, your own children. You squandered every opportunity, Gregory, and now you want to cash in on the tragedy of losing the son you never bothered to parent. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You think you've got this all sewn up with your videos and text messages? Jesse and I are still Charlotte's legal parents. The courts favor biological parents. Everyone knows that. So maybe you'll keep Carl's money, but we'll get Charlotte. How does that sound? Still feel like fighting us on every front? I stared at my son, barely recognizing the person he had become. Are you threatening to take Charlotte just to punish me for protecting Carl's trust fund? I'm being practical, he replied coldly. You can't win everything, Mom. Time to decide what matters more to you, the money or the kid. As he walked away to rejoin Jesse and Patricia, I leaned against the wall, momentarily overwhelmed by the callousness of his proposition. He was right about one thing. Family courts did typically favor biological parents, even deeply flawed ones. Was I risking Charlotte's stability by fighting so hard for control of Carl's trust? Carol? Mike appeared beside me, concern etched on his face. What did he say to you? I repeated Gregory's ultimatum, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike's expression darkened. That manipulative bastard. He's bluffing, trying to get you to cave on the money because he knows his custody case is weaker than he's pretending. But what if he's not bluffing? What if fighting for Carl's trust means losing Charlotte? Mike placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. That's not a choice you have to make. Greg's showing his true colors, making it clear this is about money, not Charlotte's well-being. Trust me, the judge will see that too. As we returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session, I prayed Mike was right, because the thought of Charlotte being used as leverage in this sordid battle for Carl's money was perhaps the most heartbreaking development yet, in a month, already overflowing with grief. The afternoon session began with Patricia Simmons calling Gregory to the stand. Under her careful questioning, he presented himself as a misunderstood father who had made difficult choices for his children's benefit. Could you explain to the court why Carl and Charlotte came to live with Mrs. Wilson? Simmons asked. Gregory adopted a somber expression. Jesse and I were going through a rough patch financially. We both lost our jobs within months of each other and were facing eviction. Rather than subject the children to instability, we made the heartbreaking decision to temporarily place them with my mother while we rebuilt our lives. And why did this temporary arrangement extend to 6 years? We wanted to ensure complete stability before disrupting their lives again, Gregory replied smoothly. Every time we felt ready to transition them home, another challenge would arise. A job loss, a housing issue, health problems. We always stayed involved, visiting when possible, calling regularly. The fabrications were so blatant I had to grip the table to keep from objecting aloud. James made notes steadily, preparing for cross-examination. How would you describe your relationship with Carl before his tragic accident? Gregory's eyes glistened with what I recognized as his practiced tears, the same performance he'd used to avoid consequences since childhood. We were rebuilding our connection, he claimed. Carl was at that difficult teenage stage, influenced by my mother's negative perspective on us, but we were making progress. We had plans to take him on a fishing trip this summer. This was news to me. No such trip had ever been mentioned to Carl, who had already committed to a science camp in July. And how has his loss affected you and your wife? Devastated doesn't begin to cover it, Gregory said, voice breaking perfectly on cue. Losing our son before we could fully repair our relationship is a pain we'll carry forever. All we have left is Charlotte and the legacy Carl left behind, which we intend to use partially to establish a memorial fund in his name. This last statement, the first mention of any plans for Carl's money beyond their own use, was clearly a calculated addition for the judge's benefit. When James rose for cross-examination, his manner was deceptively gentle. Mr. Wilson, you testified that you called your children regularly. Could you estimate how many times you spoke with Carl by phone in the year before his death? Gregory shifted uncomfortably. I don't keep an exact count. Maybe monthly? Sometimes more. I see. The phone records subpoenaed from your service provider show exactly 7 calls to your mother's home number in the past 12 months, with an average duration of less than 4 minutes. Does that refresh your recollection? Gregory flushed. I may have called from other phones, or texted. Indeed. We also have Carl's phone records, which show no texts from your number in the past 6 months. James approached with a document. This is a calendar Mrs. Wilson maintained documenting all contact between you and the children. It shows you visited exactly 3 times in the past year. Christmas Day for 2 hours, Carl's 16th birthday for approximately 45 minutes, and one unannounced visit last August. Would you like to dispute this documentation? My mother was obviously keeping score to use against us, Gregory muttered. Moving to financial matters, James continued, unperturbed. You testified about financial hardships preventing you from caring for your children. Yet your social media accounts show 4 vacations in the past 2 years, including a 2-week trip to Cancun 3 months ago. How do you reconcile these expenditures with your claimed inability to support your children? The questioning continued relentlessly, exposing contradiction after contradiction in Gregory's narrative. By the time James finished, Gregory's polished facade had crumbled into defensive hostility. Jesse's testimony followed a similar pattern. Rehearsed sympathy-seeking statements dismantled by documented evidence of her absence from the children's lives. When confronted with the text she'd sent me immediately after Carl's funeral about his trust fund, her explanation was particularly telling. I was in shock, grieving. I didn't express myself well, she claimed. So in the midst of this profound grief, James clarified, your primary concern was accessing Carl's trust fund, not comforting your daughter or supporting your mother-in-law who was handling the funeral arrangements alone? That's twisting my words, Jesse snapped, composure slipping. We needed to secure our family's future, including Charlotte's. Yet Charlotte already has her own trust fund, James pointed out. So your urgent need specifically concerned Carl's money, correct? By late afternoon, Judge Watkins had heard enough. I'll be speaking with Charlotte in chambers now, she announced. Court will resume tomorrow morning at 9. As the judge left the bench, I felt simultaneously exhausted and vindicated. The documentary evidence had effectively countered Gregory and Jesse's carefully constructed narrative, but I knew Charlotte's interview could be decisive, particularly for the custody aspect of the case. You did well, James assured me as we gathered our materials. Gregory and Jesse both appeared self-serving and dishonest. Judge Watkins doesn't miss much. What should we expect from Charlotte's interview? I asked anxiously. Despite her young age, Charlotte was remarkably perceptive and articulate, but she was still a child being asked to navigate an impossible situation. The judge will ask age-appropriate questions about her living situation, her relationship with you versus her parents, and her preferences, James explained. She won't ask directly about choosing between you and her parents. That would be inappropriate pressure. But she'll assess Charlotte's attachments and stability. In the courthouse corridor, I spotted Dr. Martinez, the court-appointed psychologist who had evaluated Charlotte the previous week. She approached with a professional smile. Mrs. Wilson, I've just submitted my report to Judge Watkins. I can't discuss specifics, but I want you to know Charlotte handled our sessions with remarkable poise. You've raised a very resilient young lady. Thank you, I replied, grateful for the small reassurance. This has been so difficult for her, losing her brother and now facing this uncertainty. Children are often more aware than we give them credit for, Dr. Martinez observed. Charlotte understands more about this situation than either side might expect. As she walked away, I wondered what exactly Charlotte had revealed in those evaluation sessions. Had she mentioned Gregory and Jesse's sudden interest in her brother just months before his death? Or the years of missed birthdays and broken promises? Or perhaps the overheard phone conversations where I'd tried to convince them to attend school events or doctor's appointments? Mike joined us as we prepared to leave. I've been watching the gallery, he reported. Greg and Jesse have been huddling with Patricia after each damaging testimony. They look rattled. Good, I said with uncharacteristic vehemence. They should be rattled. Everything they've claimed has been a self-serving distortion. Don't get overconfident, James cautioned. Tomorrow, they'll present character witnesses attempting to undermine your fitness as Charlotte's guardian. Patricia has listed several names, including your former colleague Richard Daniels. I frowned in confusion. Richard? But we barely worked together. He was in the math department. I was the principal. Apparently, he has testimony regarding your excessive work hours and prioritization of career over family, James explained. They're trying to paint you as being as negligent with Gregory as they've been with their children. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. I worked those hours to put Gregory through college, which he dropped out of, and to support this family after Gerald's construction business struggled. Richard Daniels wouldn't know the first thing about my family priorities. We'll counter it, James assured me. The important thing is to rest tonight. Tomorrow will be another long day. As we parted in the parking lot, I couldn't help wondering what Charlotte was saying at that very moment in the judge's chambers, and whether her 7-year-old voice would ultimately prove more powerful than all our legal maneuvering combined. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse to find an unexpected figure waiting outside the courtroom. Diane Fulton, Jessie's mother, whom I hadn't seen since Charlotte's christening 7 years earlier. Time hadn't been kind to her. Excessive drinking had left her face puffy and lined beyond her 60 years. "Carol," she acknowledged stiffly. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" "No," I admitted, wary of her presence. "Are you here to support Jessie and Gregory?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's what they think. Patricia prepped me to testify about what a wonderful mother Jessie was to those kids before they went to live with you." I tensed, preparing for another front in this battle. "I see." "No, you don't," Diane said, her voice lowering. "I'm not going to lie for them, Carol. I couldn't stomach it. Not after Carl." Her eyes filled with tears. "That boy sent me a Christmas card every year, you know, addressed in his careful handwriting, always with a little note updating me about his life and Charlotte's. Jessie hasn't called me on Christmas in 5 years, but Carl never forgot." This was news to me. Carl had never mentioned maintaining contact with his maternal grandmother. "He was a thoughtful boy," I said cautiously, "because you raised him that way." Diane straightened as the courthouse doors opened. "Just wanted you to know. They might have subpoenaed me, but they're not getting the testimony they expect. I've had enough of covering for Jessie's choices." Inside the courtroom, the mood was tense. Judge Watkins entered, looking solemn, and I wondered what Charlotte had revealed in their private conversation. The morning began with Patricia Simmons calling Richard Daniels, as James had warned. The former math teacher testified that I had regularly stayed at school until late evening, often prioritizing administrative duties over family responsibilities. Under cross-examination, however, he reluctantly admitted he had no first-hand knowledge of my home life, and that most of my late evenings had involved student events or parent conferences. In fact, James pressed, wasn't Mrs. Wilson known for personally attending every student activity possible, supporting children whose own parents often couldn't be bothered to show up? Daniels conceded this point, his testimony ultimately strengthening rather than damaging my reputation as someone who cared deeply about children's well-being. Next came Jessie's college roommate, who described Jessie as always talking about wanting a family and devastated when circumstances forced her to let the children stay with their grandmother. This carefully constructed narrative crumbled when James produced social media posts from the same woman, dated during the children's early years with me, showing Jessie partying with the caption, "Free at last, just child-free, just party life." By mid-morning, Patricia Simmons called Diane Fulton to the stand. I held my breath, despite Diane's earlier assurance. "Mrs. Fulton, how would you characterize your daughter's relationship with her children before they went to live with Mrs. Wilson?" Patricia began confidently. Diane looked directly at Jessie, who smiled encouragingly. "Inconsistent," she answered flatly. Patricia faltered. "Could you elaborate?" "Jessie loved the idea of having children more than the reality," Diane said, her voice steady. "When they were babies, she'd dress them up for photos, then hand them off to Gregory or me or Carol when they cried. As they got older and more demanding, she found endless reasons to be elsewhere." Patricia approached the witness stand. "Mrs. Fulton, this contradicts your earlier statement to me." "I know," Diane replied. "I was going to lie because Jessie is my daughter, and I wanted to help her. But sitting here, under oath, thinking about Carl," her voice broke. "That boy deserved better. So does Charlotte." "Your Honor," Patricia interjected, "I request a brief recess to confer with my witness." "Denied," Judge Watkins responded firmly. "The witness is free to testify truthfully. Please continue, Mrs. Fulton." Diane straightened in her chair. "When Jessie and Gregory left those children with Carol, it wasn't temporary, and it wasn't primarily financial. They'd been leaving the kids with various relatives for weekends, then weeks, then months, basically whenever parenting became inconvenient. Carol was just the only one who provided actual stability. From my seat, I could see Jessie's face contorted with rage and betrayal. Gregory sat stone-faced beside her, likely calculating how this affected their chances. "And in your observation," James asked during cross-examination, "how have the children fared under Mrs. Wilson's care?" "They thrived," Diane answered simply. "Carl became this thoughtful, responsible young man who looked after his sister and still found time to send his train wreck of a grandmother Christmas cards. And Charlotte? She's happy, secure. She calls me on my birthday every year because Carol makes sure she remembers. Diane looked directly at Judge Watkins. Carol gave those children everything my daughter wouldn't. Consistency, boundaries, unconditional love. Taking Charlotte away from her now would be cruel. By lunchtime, Patricia Simmons's witness list had backfired spectacularly. Rather than undermining my credibility, they had inadvertently reinforced the narrative of Gregory and Jesse's parental neglect and my consistent caregiving. During the break, James appeared quietly confident. Judge Watkins has been taking extensive notes, particularly during Mrs. Fulton's testimony. That kind of direct contradiction from the maternal grandmother is powerful. What happens this afternoon? I asked, picking at my untouched sandwich in the courthouse cafe. Final arguments, then the judge will likely take the matter under advisement before issuing her ruling. Given the emergency nature of the custody petition, she'll probably rule on that aspect quickly, perhaps today or tomorrow. The trust fund matter might take longer. Mike, who had been watching Gregory and Jesse huddled with Patricia across the cafeteria, rejoined us. They look like they're considering their options. Patricia keeps shaking her head at whatever they're suggesting. When court resumed, the shift in Gregory and Jesse's demeanor was immediately apparent. The confidence of the previous day had vanished, replaced by tense, whispered exchanges with their attorney. As James delivered his closing argument, methodically outlining the evidence of my consistent guardianship versus Gregory and Jesse's years of absence, I watched Judge Watkins's expression remain carefully neutral, though her occasional nods suggested she found his reasoning compelling. Patricia Simmons's closing argument focused heavily on the sacred bond between biological parents and their children, arguing that despite certain lapses in judgment, Gregory and Jesse deserved the opportunity to rebuild their relationship with Charlotte. She emphasized that the law generally favored reunification of children with biological parents when possible, urging the judge to look forward rather than backward. Judge Watkins listened attentively, then addressed the courtroom. I want to thank counsel and all witnesses for their candor in this difficult case. Before I take this matter under advisement, I have one additional witness I'd like to recall. My heart raced as she continued. Mrs. Wilson, would you please retake the stand? Surprised, I made my way to the witness box and was sworn in again. Mrs. Wilson, Judge Watkins began, I've reviewed all testimony and evidence, including my conversation with Charlotte and Dr. Martinez's psychological evaluation. I have just one question for you. She leaned forward slightly. If you retain custody of Charlotte and control of Carl's trust fund, what specifically do you intend to do with those funds? The directness of the question momentarily caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, centering myself before answering. Your Honor, I've given this considerable thought. Based on Carl's documented wishes and the values he expressed throughout his life, I would establish 3 specific allocations. First, a college fund securing Charlotte's education through graduate school, if she chooses that path. Second, a scholarship program in Carl's name for students pursuing environmental science, his intended career. And third, I paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. A water safety foundation teaching underprivileged children to swim and promoting lake safety measures, so other families might be spared what we've endured. Judge Watkins nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That will be all. As I returned to my seat, Gregory and Jesse exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Patricia Simmons was writing furiously on her legal pad. Court is adjourned, Judge Watkins announced. I will issue my ruling on the custody matter tomorrow morning at 9. The trust fund issue will be addressed in a written opinion to follow. As the courtroom began to empty, I felt oddly calm, despite the uncertainty still hanging over us. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had fought with everything I had for both Carl's legacy and Charlotte's future. I had told the truth, stood my ground, and articulated a vision for the trust fund that truly honored my grandson's values. Walking toward the exit, I heard Gregory call my name. I turned reluctantly, James and Mike instantly flanking me protectively. Mom, he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. We need to talk, privately. I regarded my son warily, remembering his earlier ultimatum about choosing between Charlotte and Carl's money. I think everything that needs to be said has been said in court, Gregory. Please, he insisted, an unfamiliar desperation in his voice. 5 minutes. Without the lawyers. James placed a protective hand on my shoulder. You don't need to speak with him outside of court, Carol. Not after everything that's happened. I studied Gregory's face, the features so like Gerald's, yet lacking his integrity. What could he possibly want now, after 2 days of courtroom character assassination? 5 minutes, I agreed finally. In the conference room. But Mike stays with me. Gregory hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The small conference room off the main corridor offered privacy with its frosted glass walls. Gregory sat across from me, while Mike stood guard by the door, arms crossed. "Where's Jessie?" I asked, noticing her absence. "Talking to Patricia." Gregory ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Mom, this has gotten out of hand." "That's one way of describing your attempt to take Carl's trust fund and Charlotte away from me immediately after his death," I replied evenly. "Look, I know how it appears, but we're in trouble. Serious trouble." His voice dropped. "We owe money to some dangerous people. That's why we needed Carl's trust fund so urgently." I stared at him, processing this revelation. "What kind of trouble?" "Jessie has a gambling problem," he admitted, not meeting my eyes. "Started with casual betting on sports, escalated to online poker, then casinos. We're in debt to loan sharks for nearly $200,000. And you thought Carl's death was your convenient solution," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "It wasn't like that," he protested, though without conviction. "We were desperate. When we heard about the accident," he trailed off, perhaps realizing how callous any continuation would sound. "So all this talk about parental rights and reconnecting with Charlotte was just a smokescreen? A way to access money to pay off gambling debts?" Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "Charlotte was leverage. We knew you'd fight for Carl's trust fund, but thought you might give in if we threatened to take her." The cold calculation behind this admission left me momentarily speechless. Mike made a disgusted noise from his position by the door. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because we want to make a deal," Gregory said, leaning forward. "We'll drop everything. The custody petition, the claim to Carl's trust, all of it, if you'll help us with the debt." I studied my son, seeing not just Gerald's features, but hints of the little boy who'd once had such promise before choices and selfishness hardened him. "You're asking me to use Carl's trust fund to bail you out of gambling debts?" "Not all of it," he clarified quickly. "Just enough to get these guys off our backs. 200,000 out of nearly $1 million. You'd still have plenty for those scholarships and whatever else you mentioned to the judge." The audacity was breathtaking. "And in exchange, you'll graciously allow me to keep custody of the granddaughter I've raised for 6 years? How generous." "Mom, please." Gregory's voice took on a desperate edge. "These aren't people you can negotiate with or delay. They've already made threats. We need the money by next week or what?" I pressed. "Or they've promised to start breaking things. They mentioned knowing where we live and where you and Charlotte live." Mike stepped forward. "Are you actually threatening your own mother and daughter now, Greg? Using some phantom loan sharks as leverage?" "It's not a threat," Gregory insisted. "It's the reality we're facing. I'm trying to protect everyone." I sat back, suddenly tired beyond words. The son I'd raised had sunk lower than I'd imagined possible, using his son's death and his daughter's well-being as bargaining chips to solve gambling debts. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "We don't have much time," Gregory pressed. "Patricia's preparing to file additional motions tomorrow if the custody ruling doesn't go our way. This could drag on for months, with appeals, continuances, whatever it takes. Charlotte's stuck in limbo, your legal bills mounting." "I understand the implications," I replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to consult with my attorney and check on Charlotte." Outside the conference room, I relayed Gregory's proposition to James, whose professional composure momentarily slipped into undisguised contempt. "This confirms everything we've argued about their motives," he noted. "If Judge Watkins knew they were essentially attempting to extort money from Carl's trust using Charlotte as leverage, I'm not sure it matters anymore." I sighed. "What matters is ending this quickly for Charlotte's sake. She's already lost her brother. This ongoing battle is only adding to her trauma." "What are you considering?" Mike asked, concern evident in his voice. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to fight this to the bitter end on principle. But another part wonders if some compromise might be best for Charlotte, even if it means Gregory and Jessie get something they don't deserve." James placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Don't make any decisions tonight. Let's see what Judge Watkins rules on custody tomorrow. That will clarify our position considerably." That evening, After tucking Charlotte into bed with extra stories and reassurances, I sat in Gerald's office again, seeking wisdom from his presence that lingered in the room. The blue folder labeled Contingency Measures lay open on the desk, Gerald's meticulous planning evident in every page. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Charlotte stood in the doorway in her astronaut pajamas, clutching her stuffed otter. "Can't sleep, sweetheart?" I asked, opening my arms to her. She climbed into my lap, settling against me with the complete trust of a child who knows she's safe. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. Are they going to make me go with Mom and Dad?" I stroked her hair, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know what the judge will decide, but no matter what happens, I will always be your grandmother, and I will always love you and look out for you." "I told the judge I want to stay with you," she confided. She was nice. She asked lots of questions about what I do every day, and about school, and about when I see Mom and Dad. "What did you tell her about that?" I asked gently. "The truth, that they hardly ever come, and when they do, they're mostly looking at their phones or arguing." Charlotte looked up at me with eyes far too knowing for her 7 years. "I also told her about Carl's letter." My hand paused mid-stroke. "What letter, sweetheart?" "The one he wrote me before he went to the lake with his friends. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should remember that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing, even when you are scared." Her small face grew solemn. "I think he knew something might happen to him, Grandma." I fought back sudden tears. "Carl was always looking out for you, wasn't he?" She nodded. "He said in the letter that you were the best mom he ever had, and that I should always listen to you because you only want what's good for us." Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. I showed the letter to the judge. She made a copy of it. I held Charlotte tighter, overwhelmed by this revelation. Even at the end, Carl had been protecting his sister, providing evidence of his wishes in his own 16-year-old words, evidence that might prove decisive in tomorrow's ruling. "You did exactly the right thing," I assured her. "That was very brave." As I carried a finally drowsy Charlotte back to bed, I realized something had shifted within me. Gregory's proposition no longer seemed like a difficult dilemma, but a continuation of his lifelong pattern, creating problems, then expecting others to sacrifice to solve them. Carl had given his life trying to save another child. He had lived with generosity and integrity despite his parents' example. Using his trust fund to bail out Jesse's gambling debts wouldn't honor his memory. It would betray everything he stood for. By morning, I had made my decision. Whatever Judge Watkins ruled, I would not be manipulated into compromising Carl's legacy. His trust fund would serve the purposes he had valued: education, environmental protection, water safety, not enabling the destructive behavior that had deprived him of real parents during his short life. As Charlotte and I prepared for court, she seemed calmer than I expected, carefully choosing her favorite blue dress, because Carl said blue makes people trust you. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, kneeling to adjust her collar. She nodded solemnly. "Carl said we had to be brave together, so that's what we're doing." "That's exactly what we're doing," I agreed, drawing strength from her simple faith that doing the right thing would somehow be enough. The courtroom was unusually crowded that morning. News of the dramatic testimony had spread, drawing curious courthouse staff and a few local reporters. Charlotte sat beside me in the front row, her small hand clasped tightly in mine, while Mike formed a protective barrier on her other side. Across the aisle, Gregory and Jesse whispered intensely with Patricia, occasionally glancing our way with unreadable expressions. Judge Watkins entered precisely at 9, her demeanor suggesting she hadn't taken this decision lightly. "Before I deliver my ruling," she began after the preliminaries, "I want to address the minor child present in the courtroom." She looked directly at Charlotte with a gentle smile. "Charlotte, I know these past weeks have been very difficult for you, losing your brother and now having adults argue about what happens next. I want you to know that everyone here, your parents, your grandmother, and this court, wants what's best for you, even if we sometimes disagree about what that means." Charlotte nodded solemnly, sitting up straighter in her chair. "Now, regarding the emergency petition for change of custody filed by Gregory and Jessica Wilson," Judge Watkins continued, her expression turning professional once more, "the court has carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented, with particular attention to the stable environment necessary for a child who has recently experienced significant trauma." The room fell completely silent as she continued. "Family courts generally presume that children belong with biological parents when possible. However, this presumption can be overcome by clear and convincing evidence that such placement would be contrary to the child's best interests. She shuffled her papers deliberately. In this case, the evidence is not merely clear and convincing. It is overwhelming. I felt Charlotte's hand tighten in mine as Judge Watkins methodically detailed her findings. The 6-year pattern of parental absence documented in calendars, school records, and witness testimony. The stability and care I had provided. Charlotte's own expressed preferences. And finally, the timing and apparent motivation behind Gregory and Jessie's sudden interest in reclaiming their daughter. Particularly troubling to this court, Judge Watkins noted, is the evidence suggesting that the petitioner's primary motivation appears to be financial rather than concern for their daughter's well-being. The text message sent by Ms. Wilson mere hours after her son's funeral, focusing exclusively on his trust fund rather than Charlotte's emotional needs, speaks volumes about priorities. She paused, looking directly at Gregory and Jessie. Additionally, the court has reviewed a letter written by Carl Wilson shortly before his death, provided by Charlotte during our chambers interview. This letter explicitly states his wish that Charlotte remain with Mrs. Wilson, whom he described as the best mom he ever had. Jessie made a small, pained sound. Gregory stared stonily ahead. Therefore, Judge Watkins continued, the emergency petition for change of custody is denied. Further, the court is converting Mrs. Wilson's temporary guardianship to permanent legal guardianship, with Gregory and Jessica Wilson granted monthly visitation rights to be supervised initially by the court's Family Services Department. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. Charlotte remained still beside me, processing the ruling with a gravity beyond her years. Regarding the matter of Carl Wilson's trust fund, Judge Watkins added, I am issuing a separate written opinion today, but will summarize my findings briefly. After reviewing the trust documentation and evidence of Carl's expressed wishes, the court finds that Mrs. Wilson, as trustee, retains full discretionary authority over the disposition of these funds. The petition seeking to redirect these funds to the biological parents is denied. Patricia Simmons immediately rose. Your Honor, we intend to appeal both rulings. That is your right, Ms. Simmons. Judge Watkins interrupted firmly. However, I strongly suggest you advise your clients to consider whether prolonging this matter serves anyone's interests, particularly Charlotte's. Her gaze hardened. I should note that evidence presented in these proceedings raises serious questions about your client's financial management and potential exploitation of a minor's trust fund. Should you proceed with appeals, the court may feel obligated to refer these matters for further investigation. The implied warning was unmistakable. Patricia's confidence visibly faltered as she conferred quietly with Gregory and Jessie. Court is adjourned, Judge Watkins declared, bringing the gavel down with finality. As people began filing out, Charlotte looked up at me. Does this mean I get to stay with you, Grandma? For real? Yes, sweetheart, I assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. For real? She nodded, accepting this with the same resilience she'd shown throughout the ordeal. Carl would be happy. He was worried they might try to take me away someday. This revelation, that Carl had anticipated his parents' potential actions, added another layer to my understanding of how deeply he had tried to protect his sister, even as a teenager. As we prepared to leave, Gregory approached us hesitantly, Jessie hovering several steps behind him. Mom, he began awkwardly, we need to talk about what happens now. There's nothing to discuss, Gregory, I replied evenly. The court has ruled. Charlotte stays with me, and Carl's trust fund will be used according to his wishes, not to bail out gambling debts. His face flushed. Those people are dangerous. I wasn't exaggerating about that. Then I suggest you speak with the police, I said. Or perhaps it's time you and Jessie faced the consequences of your choices without expecting Carl or Charlotte or me to rescue you. You're really not going to help us? Disbelief colored his voice. After everything? After everything, I confirmed quietly. I'm choosing to honor Carl's memory and protect Charlotte's future. That's what parents are supposed to do, Gregory. Put their children's needs above their own. It's a lesson you and Jessie never learned. Mike stepped forward. I've already arranged for additional security at Carol's home, Greg, and I've taken the liberty of informing the local police about potential threats. They'll be keeping an eye on the neighborhood. Gregory's expression hardened. So, that's it? You're turning your back on your own son? No, I corrected him gently. I'm refusing to enable behavior that hurts the children I've been entrusted to protect. There's a difference. I took Charlotte's hand. We're going home now. You're welcome to call and arrange supervised visitation through family services, as the judge ordered. As we walked away, I heard Jessie's angry voice behind us. This isn't over, Carol. You can't just— Actually, she can, Mike interrupted firmly. And she has. I suggest you both accept that and start figuring out how to solve your own problems for once. Outside the courthouse, the spring sunshine felt like a physical blessing after weeks of emotional darkness. Charlotte skipped down the steps beside me, already showing signs of the resilience that would help her navigate life without her beloved brother. What happens now, Grandma? She asked as we reached the car. Now, I said, helping her with her seatbelt, we start building the future Carl would want for us, starting with the Carl Wilson Foundation. Over the following months, that's exactly what we did. Working with James and a team of financial advisors, I established a three-pronged foundation using Carl's trust fund. 1/3 was secured in a separate trust for Charlotte's education and future needs. Another third funded the Carl Wilson Environmental Scholarship, supporting students pursuing degrees in environmental science at Carl's planned university. The final portion established the Carl Wilson Water Safety Initiative, providing swimming lessons for underprivileged children and advocating for improved safety measures at public lakes. Gregory and Jessie eventually dropped their appeal threats when their attorney, facing Judge Watkins's implied investigation warning, withdrew from the case. They moved out of state shortly after, their supervised visitations becoming increasingly sporadic before stopping altogether. Charlotte expressed neither surprise nor particular sadness at their gradual disappearance. They had been functionally absent for most of her life already. Mike, however, remained, ultimately relocating his architectural practice back to Pennsylvania to be closer to us. He became the male presence Charlotte needed, a devoted uncle who showed up for school events, helped with science projects, and taught her to fish, something Carl had planned to do that final summer. On the first anniversary of Carl's death, Charlotte and I visited his grave together, bringing fresh flowers and a small plaque describing the foundation established in his name. As I watched her carefully arranging wildflowers around the headstone, I noticed how much she'd grown in a year, taller, more confident, but with Carl's same thoughtful expression when she concentrated. "Do you think he knows?" she asked suddenly. "About the foundation and the scholarships and everything?" "I believe he does," I answered, choosing my words carefully. Carl's faith was very important to him. He believed in heaven, in a place where he could still watch over us. Charlotte nodded, satisfied with this answer. The first scholarship kids start college this fall. Carl would think that's pretty cool, wouldn't he? He'd think it's very cool, I agreed, smiling through my tears. Later that evening, as Charlotte slept peacefully in her blue and silver room with its ceiling of painted stars, I sat in Gerald's office, surrounded by foundation paperwork. Sometimes in the quiet moments, grief still ambushed me. The sudden, sharp realization that Carl would never graduate high school, never attend college, never bring home a first love, or pursue his dreams of environmental advocacy. Yet alongside that grief had grown something unexpected, a sense of purpose more powerful than mere survival. In honoring Carl's memory through tangible action, I had found a way to keep him present in the world. Each scholarship recipient, each child who learned to swim safely, each day that Charlotte grew with security and love, all of these were extensions of his too brief life. Gerald had been right about Gregory all along. His selfishness and poor choices had ultimately cost him everything that mattered. But Gerald had also been right about me, about the strength I didn't know I possessed until tested by unimaginable loss. As I closed the foundation ledger for the night, my gaze fell on the framed photograph of Carl in his science fair blazer, proudly displaying his project on lake ecosystem preservation. Beside it stood a newer photo, Charlotte at the foundation's inaugural scholarship ceremony, presenting the award to a bright-eyed young woman who shared Carl's passion for environmental protection. "We're doing okay, Carl," I whispered to the empty room that somehow never felt truly empty. "We're making sure your life continues to matter." And somewhere, I felt certain, he knew. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.